6 years ago, I promised I would make at least one video about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Here's part 1, the review. Hello Internet, my name is Andrew Eder, and welcome to another episode of Film Editorials. It's been a while, hasn't it? If you've seen anything on this channel before, you may recognize that this is a new setup. I don't know if this is going to be a long-term thing, but I did promise I would make a video on Star Wars Episode 9, so here we are. I am recording this in December of 2025, so it has literally been 6 years since The Rise of Skywalker came out. I've had plenty of time to sit with my thoughts on how I feel about the movie, how I would have liked to have seen the movie come out, and so I think it's finally time for me to do videos on them. Obviously, having opinions on the internet about Star Wars is a fraught endeavor, but I have opinions on Star Wars and I am on the internet. So here we go. Also, I'm probably a small enough channel that this isn't going to get a lot of traction and no one's going to care, but I wanted to get the thoughts out of my head so that I don't have to sit with them all the time anymore. As I've alluded to, this will be part 1 of a 2-part series. This is going to be my review of the movie as it currently exists, and part 2 is going to be my pitch / headcanon for what I wish the movie was, or if someone had asked me what movie we should make for Episode 9, what I would have done instead of what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio did. But like I said, this is going to be a review of the movie as it currently exists, so let's get into that headspace and think about the movie that was released in theaters in December of 2019, before the dark times, before the Empire, before the pandemic. Ugh. Now, before we dive into the thick of things, I do have a couple of caveats and housekeeping things to mention. First, this is going to be a spoiler-full conversation. The movie came out 6 years ago. If you haven't seen it yet, you probably aren't that worried about spoilers, but in case you are somehow worried about spoilers, don't watch this video until after you've seen the movie, I guess. Secondly, I do generally like what Disney has been doing with Star Wars. I am not a Disney Star Wars hater. I find those people very annoying. Furthermore, I particularly enjoy The Last Jedi. I think Rian Johnson did was really cool in a lot of ways. Not everything hit, which I think we'll talk about at some point in this review, but the stuff he did with Luke Skywalker, I'm very okay with. I think it's really cool. I really like what he's done with the characters, and I think it makes a lot of sense what he did with those characters, given the way J.J. Abrams set everything up in The Force Awakens. I think what Rian Johnson did, perfectly logical and reasonable, given what happened in The Force Awakens. The same cannot be said for how I feel about The Rise of Skywalker. Now, to do a very brief recap for those of you who have not seen the movie and don't care about spoilers, or have seen the movie but not for a long time and have forgotten about it, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker was directed by J.J. Abrams and written by J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio. More on that in a moment. It continues the story of Rey and her struggle against the First Order, now led by Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. The opening crawl of the movie tells us that there has been this message broadcast throughout the galaxy, implying that Emperor Palpatine has somehow returned and is going to be up to something. And so the movie begins with Kylo Ren trying to get to the source of that transmission. It turns out Palpatine is in fact alive and has a giant fleet of Star Destroyers, and he says, "All of this can be yours, Kylo Ren, so long as you go find Rey and kill her." Rey, meanwhile, has been practicing her Jedi skills, running and jumping through the forest. She's frustrated because the other Jedi of the past aren't communicating with her through the Force, which she thinks is weird. And then she also starts thinking about how she's going to investigate Palpatine's message, and nobody's really sure if it's legitimate or not on the Resistance side of things. While she's asking those questions, Finn, Poe, Chewbacca, a couple other Resistance guys are going to meet their contact who's in contact with a spy inside of the First Order, and they find out that yes, the Emperor is in fact alive, and his new fleet of Star Destroyers is going to be a big problem to the Resistance, and they're all going to die unless they do something about it right away. Doing something about it right away looks like going on this very long, convoluted, fast-paced quest to find out where the Emperor is. And they have to find an old ship which may have a map to the place where they need to go, This involves many steps, including going into the middle of the desert, getting sucked into some quicksand, finding a dagger with secret Sith runes on it that C-3PO can't translate out loud because it's forbidden, having to go to a droid smith to get C-3PO's memory unlocked so that he can actually translate the runes that he's read, going to the ruins of the second Death Star, finding the map that they need. Uh-oh, Kylo Ren destroys the map. Whoops. Actually, just kidding, he already had the map, and off they go to the planet where they end up defeating the Emperor and saving the day. In all of this, Rey is struggling with her temper issues and the fact that she may be connected to the dark side. In fact, we find out that she is descended from Emperor Palpatine. She is his granddaughter. Kylo Ren confronts her at various times along the way, culminating in their duel on the ruins of the second Death Star, where Kylo Ren gets distracted or influenced in some way by the Force presence of his mother, Leia, so that Rey ends up stabbing him. She does end up healing him a second later because she feels bad about stabbing the person that she was really concerned about stabbing with a second before. But she heals him, and it turns out that this leads to his redemption, where he has a conversation with the memory of Han Solo. Since she is conflicted about going to fight her grandfather, Rey goes off to Ahch-To, where she has a conversation with the ghost of Luke. He talks her into going to fight the Emperor. She goes off to confront the Emperor. The rest of the Resistance shows up to try and blow up all the Star Destroyers. All the Star Destroyers do end up getting blown up, but only after a fleet of normal people with spaceships show up in this giant armada to save the day. And Rey does end up destroying the Emperor, who kind of rebuilds himself after he sucks the life force out of Rey and Kylo Ren because they're standing close together. We'll talk about it. But the moral of the story is that Rey basically dies in the attempt. Kylo Ren comes back from the hole he had been thrown into, and he is able to force heal Rey enough so that she's alive, and he dies instead. All the surviving characters hug at the end, and then at the very end we get this kind of coda where Rey buries Luke and Leia's lightsabers in the sand of Tatooine, claims the last name Skywalker, and looks off into the sunset with BB-8. That's our lightning fast summary of this pretty long but very fast-paced movie. The first half of this movie goes like a mile a minute. Now, to start, I have some nice things to say about this movie. First, it looks fantastic. Disney spent a bunch of money on it, and most of that money is on the screen. The effects are awesome. Lightsaber battles have rarely looked this good. Space battles have rarely looked this good. The visual effects teams are going nuts. There's a lot of practical stuff. There's puppets, there's guys in suits, there's remote controlled things, and it feels like these people are in the places where they're supposed to be. It doesn't feel like there's on a lot of green screen sets, even though there are huge amounts of green screen and blue screen sets, but it looks and feels like they're actually in these places. The movie also sounds great. The sound designers, sound editors, all those folks are doing a great job. Basically everybody is doing a great job with a couple very specific exceptions, which we'll get to. Another standout is, of course, John Williams, who composed the music for the movie, as he has with all of the other mainline Star Wars movies. But he also gets a nice little cameo in the bar in Kijimi, the smuggler planet where the droid smith lives. He has a little cameo in the bar with like an eye patch. Also, there's a behind-the-scenes documentary where they talk about all the stuff that they put around him in the bar, which are all references to other movies that he's composed the scores for. As a big John Williams fan, I was really excited to see him there, and it was really nice to hear about all the little doodads and stuff that they put in to honor the other work that he's done, because he's such an integral part of Star Wars and American filmmaking for the past like 50 years. So it was really nice to see that. Speaking of the droidsmith on Kijimi, the character's name is Babu Frick, and he's this little guy, and he's fantastic. He's great. He provides a lot of humor to a scene that goes back and forth between very funny and very dark. He was a great addition, and his species, which I don't remember off the top of my head right now, makes a couple of appearances in other projects since then, and they're just great little silly guys. One new concept that this movie introduces that I think is pretty cool is that Rey and Kylo Ren can like pass each other stuff through the Force. We've seen that they've been able to communicate through the Force before, basically having a conversation as if they're in the same room, sometimes more literally than others. But Episode 9 shows us that they can actually like hand each other things, and things near them can move through the Force to the other person. And that was cool. I don't understand how it works, but it's neat. Obviously, this comes to a culmination when Rey passes the lightsaber behind her back to Ben so that he can fight off the Knights of Ren. That was a really cool moment, and also leads to the really funny shrug. I do also want to talk about Carrie Fisher's death. Obviously, she wasn't around for the filming of the movie, and so they had to honor her and bring her back somehow, because having her die off screen, I think, would have felt weird. They could have been like, oh, Leia's away, not around here, we'll talk to her via hologram a couple of times. I think that might have been a little less awkward, but also would have called attention to the fact that she was missing. And so using lines and takes that they didn't use in episode 7 and 8 to bring Carrie Fisher into this movie, I think was probably the best they could do given the circumstances. It does feel a little awkward, like they have Princess Leia soundboard and they have to try and write scenes around the lines that they have, which I think is exactly what they did. So that's a little awkward, but I recognize that that's a really tough situation to be in. Now it's time, though, to start talking about the things that I didn't like as much. This movie is supported by 4 pillars. There are 4 major decisions that Abrams and Terrio made about this movie, and we have to talk about each of them in turn. These 4 decisions are the redemption of Kylo Ren, answering the question of who the big villain of the story is going to be, finally weighing in definitively on the question of Rey's identity and how she relates or doesn't relate to other characters in the Star Wars franchise, and what is Finn up to? How is he taking down the First Order? To begin, we have the redemption of Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren does end up redeeming himself in this movie. He starts off fully committed to the dark side, and by the end of it, he's fully committed to the light side, sacrificing himself to save Rey. This is a good thing. It is a good decision, but I don't want to give too much praise to Abrams and Terrio here because I think it's the only correct decision in regards to Kylo Ren. There was a lot of talk at the time about, is Kylo Ren going to stay evil? Like, it looked like he had chosen evil at the end of The Last Jedi. Is he gonna stick with it? And some people sounded really excited that, ooh, maybe we'll get a Skywalker who doesn't turn back to the light side. I think that would have been a massive, massive mistake. One of the core themes of Star Wars, one of the essential themes of Star Wars, is redemption. Recognizing that you've been behaving badly, and making changes to behave better, becoming good again. That is absolutely vital to Star Wars storytelling. Darth Vader is one of the most famous, most iconic, most villainous villains in film history, and he becomes good by the end. He gets redeemed. That's essential to Star Wars. And I think overall, Abrams and Terrio do a good job of actually achieving Kylo's redemption in the movie as it exists, which is great. The scene where Kylo Ren, now Ben Solo, talks to the memory of his father Han is probably the best single scene in this movie. It's emotionally resonant, it sticks the landing as far as his redemption goes, it mirrors the scene when Ren killed Han to begin with. That works really well for me. I like that a lot. And so having Kylo Ren be redeemed is really important, and I'm glad that they did it because I would have been really mad if they didn't do that. Also, since episode 9 is the culmination of the Skywalker Saga, it's being called, the 9 movies from episode 1 to episode 9, should be broadly about the same things or about the same issues. And so since the prequel trilogy is about Anakin's fall and the original trilogy is about his redemption and Luke's rise, then ending it with Kylo Ren turning to the dark side and being bad the whole time feels bad. It makes the Skywalkers more evil than they were good, which is not the message we want to be doing here with Star Wars. Star Wars is a mythology, a morality play almost, basically for children. It's for everybody to enjoy as well, says the adult surrounded by various toys and paraphernalia, but it is supposed to teach us like how to live our lives, which is usually reserved for children. And if that seems too innocent or too rose-colored glasses, also consider the cynical side, where having your main family of protagonists be evil is bad for the brand. Like, you don't want to do that. At least it's a lot harder to sell toys. There aren't a lot of, Paul Atreides action figures for the Dune franchise, just because, he's a monster. Spoiler alert. So that's core pillar number 1, redemption of Kylo Ren, nice and strong, I like it. Number 2 is the identity of the big bad. And this is where we get into somehow Palpatine has returned. Now, this may come as kind of a surprise, but I don't actually have a problem with Palpatine coming back for this 9th movie. As I mentioned, this film being the final installment of the Skywalker Saga, I feel like all 9 movies should broadly be about the same thing. In the original trilogy, the Emperor was pulling strings from behind the scene. In the prequel trilogy, we see him directly interacting with our main characters, again pulling the strings, setting everything up. The Clone Wars is him on both sides. He's manipulating everything and controlling everyone. Having him come back for the final movie kind of puts a bow on things, wrapping it all up in the same package. Oh, it's still about the Emperor. The Emperor's coming back. It's still about the Sith. I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with him having been around the whole time, because episodes 7 and 8 don't mention him at all. In the original trilogy, the Emperor gets mentioned like 2 or 3 times, I think, by the Imperial characters, and he plays a bigger and bigger role as the original trilogy goes on. He appears in episode 5, and then obviously he's a major character in episode 6. But because we started with Snoke, and no mention whatsoever was made of his origins until now, then we kind of have to do everything at once. We have to explain how the Emperor came back. Actually, he's been back the whole time. We have to explain where Snoke came from, because why would the Emperor allow Snoke to exist if the Emperor is actually controlling things? We have to do all this stuff, which asks more questions than it answers, because, you know, a lot of the answers we do have come from supplementary materials that came out after the movie was released. So, you know, making this review 6 years after the fact, I can kind of talk about, you know, oh, Snoke is a cloned strand cast that the Emperor can control through the Force by proxy, so that it doesn't look like he's controlling the galaxy, but it's actually him the whole time. Bringing the Emperor back is actually a fairly, I want to say, efficient way to make the entire franchise about the same thing. But having him be back at the start of the movie means that we get kicked out of the movie by asking questions that we don't get the answer to. Like, if he's been here the whole time, why is he living on Exegol and not, you know, actually running things? If the Emperor has been around for the entirety of the sequel trilogy, then did he actually die in the Death Star? The answer seems to be yes, but he looks really gross. So why is he old and decaying and not kind of youngish if they've put him into a new body? Is he aging really quickly because of the dark side of the Force? I got kicked out of the movie almost immediately by having to try and answer these questions in my head, and they don't give us particularly satisfying answers. There have been answers in supplementary materials, but I don't know all of them, and sometimes those are also really dissatisfying because we still have to, you know, have established that Palpatine was pulling the strings this whole time. It also makes Snoke a lot less interesting because, oh, he's just a remote control puppet for the Emperor. Cool, I guess. If the Emperor is going to come back, I think it would have been a much more interesting decision to have his return be part of the story. I think it would have made a lot of sense to have the end of Act 2 of this movie be like Palpatine's grand return. This movie tries to have it both ways, where, oh, Palpatine's been pulling the strings the whole time, and uh-oh, now he's back. We see this with Allegiant General Pryde, who is a new character who gets introduced in this movie, and it turns out that he's actually like a big-time fan of the Emperor and worked with him in the past during the Empire days, and so now he's also in command of the First Order. We've never heard about him before, and the fact that he's like a big fanboy is supposed to be like, uh-oh, the Emperor is back and he's bringing all of his friends with him. But it again makes me wonder, if he's been here the whole time, did Pryde know he was there? Is Pryde in on the plan? Or is he just now finding out and he's really excited? So I would consider this column to be okay. Its structural integrity is weakened, but I recognize that it's supporting the story and is in fact a decent decision to start with. Like when they announced in the trailer that, oh, Palpatine was coming back, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. The execution though, not as big a fan of. Our next supporting column about Rey's identity is not so robust. To start at the end, when Rey claims the identity of Skywalker, I am okay with that decision. I think that makes a lot of sense from a brand perspective. If our Skywalker saga is ending, we don't want to throw everything away. We want to keep the Skywalkers around because they're so integral to what Star Wars is. Also, since Rey hasn't had a last name this whole time, I think it makes a lot of sense to, like, they've been kind of setting her up to be a Skywalker this whole time. Like, that was never a surprise to me. The execution's a little awkward, but Star Wars has never been immune to clunky and awkward dialogue. See most of Episode 2. So yeah, I'm fine with Rey Skywalker. I'm fine with her taking that name by the end of the movie. I am a lot less fine, though, with her finding out that she is Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter. For one thing, this again takes me completely out of the movie because I suddenly have to start worrying about how did Palpatine have a kid who can have a kid of his or her own. We have found out through, I think, books and comics that Palpatine's son is not actually his son. He's a failed clone who then went off and got married to Rey's mom, both of whom we see in The Rise of Skywalker in flashbacks. That's not information that we get in the actual movie, though, so the movie makes it seem like Emperor Palpatine had a child with a woman, and like, he's really gross at the time that this conversation is happening, so we don't really want to be thinking about that. Also, like, who would have a kid with Palpatine? Like, he doesn't seem like the type to be particularly romantic. Is this like an Ava Braun thing where, like, she's also pretty evil? What? Again, we're asking more questions than we're answering, and this is the third movie in the third trilogy. We should be wrapping things up. Furthermore, and more importantly, Rey being related to Palpatine undermines the character growth and her whole character arc. In episodes 7 and 8, the theme of identity is massive. Obviously, episode 7 is set up more as a mystery box of we don't know who she's related to, but it seems like she's related to somebody. Episode 8 says, oh, actually, she's not related to anybody. All our speculation was incorrect. She's not related to anybody. She's related to nobodies. Which, that was really, really cool. And I think that Rian Johnson absolutely sticks the landing there. I love that development for her. Because while a lot of other characters are worrying about what it means to be, you know, related to a Skywalker, related to a Solo, an ex-Stormtrooper, related to other rebel heroes, Rey's struggle is, how should she act at all? How should she interact with this world? What does it mean to be good when she has basically superpowers through the Force? By making her the grandchild of Emperor Palpatine, though, it gives her a focus. I started kind of thinking about this as her swimming in the ocean and she's been sucked under. In episode 8, she finds out that she has no frame of reference, so she's trying to figure out which way is up. How is she going to get to the surface so she can start breathing again, in my underwater drowning metaphor that I'm working with here. By telling us that she's not related to anybody, she has to figure out which way is up on her own. Which way is the right way to act on her own. She has to figure that out for herself. By making her a descendant of Palpatine, it gives her a frame of reference. It gives her a rock bottom. She has now reached the ocean floor and she can kick off of that and swim in the opposite direction to reach the surface. It gives her an answer when she should be trying to figure out an answer for herself. Also, being related to the worst person that you know is a plotline that we have seen before. Luke is, of course, Anakin Skywalker's / Darth Vader's son, and they've interacted many times. Vader's tried to kill Luke a couple of times at that point in the story, so finding out that they're related is a huge gut punch to him. It's more of a revelation for us, and like, we're gonna be more upset about it than Rey is. Rey is finding out that she's related to a person who, until very recently, everybody thought was dead, and he just happens to be really, really bad. And she knows that, but in kind of a academic way. She doesn't have a relationship, a history with him. So this is basically the Darth Vader revelation, the I am your father speech, but it's not as good. So our third pillar is really weak. I wouldn't put a lot of weight on it. I think it's termite infested, to extend the metaphor. I'm not a fan. And that brings us to our fourth. What is Finn up to? How is his Stormtrooper rebellion going? Now you may be saying to yourself, but Andrew, there was no Stormtrooper rebellion. Not really. in this movie. What are you talking about? That's correct. This pillar is missing. There's a very brief conversation between Finn and Jannah about how she used to be a stormtrooper and she and her friends also defected because they were largely inspired by what Finn did when he left the First Order. But it's not clear that they're doing anything to resist the First Order. They're just hanging out on Kef Bir next to the remains of the second Death Star. Are they participating in the rebellion? I think Finn's character arc across the 3 movies was being established pretty clearly. In The Force Awakens, Finn rebels from the First Order. He decides not to shoot unarmed civilians, which is a good thing, to be clear. And then he tries to run away from the First Order because it's not his problem. Then he decides to fight against the First Order, but only to save Rey. He's only worried about what she's up to. He's not worried about the Resistance as a whole. In The Last Jedi, he moves from only worrying about the Resistance for Rey's sake to becoming a true believer in the Resistance. He's fighting against the First Order because the First Order is bad and needs to be stopped. That's his arc on paper. That gets a little bit lost in all the antics on Canto Bight, which is why that sequence is awkward. I've been trying to figure out how I would have fixed it. I have some ideas, but that's not the point of this video. But by the end of episode 8, Finn is a true believer, which should lead us in episode 9 to Finn basically proselytizing and spreading the good news of the Resistance to anyone he'll meet. And if he can convince a bunch of stormtroopers to side with him, that would be awesome. But in the movie as it currently exists, we don't get that. Finn has a secret of some kind, which he seems reluctant to tell people, though in moments of crisis he wants to tell people. That's one thing that he's up to. The other thing that he's up to is just shouting people's names. Mostly Rey, trying to get her to do things or not do things, or, I don't know, providing moral support in a sword fight, which he cannot participate in. So that's all he has to work with. And it's not a lot. As for the secret he has, it has come out since the movie has been released that what he was wanting to tell everyone is that he was Force sensitive. I don't know why he would have been trying to hide that, why he wouldn't have been talking to people about that beforehand. It's not like it's this big secret, like, oh, I think I might be Force sensitive. Like, I can sense things happening, which we see a couple of times in the movies, that he like knows things he shouldn't have a way of knowing. That's not really a secret that you'd want to hide from people. Like, if I could move things with my mind, if I could sense things from happening farther away, I would be telling everyone, especially the only other person I know who's Force sensitive. And like, she hangs out with Leia all the time, who we also find out is really Force sensitive and like trained to be a Jedi, but then stopped for reasons. So it's being kept as a secret for some reason. When I was watching the movie, though, I didn't think it was about his Force sensitivity. I thought it was he was going to tell Rey that he was in love with her, which that's a thing that you would want to keep to yourself. Like, oh, I don't want to tell my crush that I have a crush on them in case they reject me, kind of thing. Or like, oh, she's really busy because she's the only Jedi left and she's trying to save the galaxy, so obviously I'm not going to bother her with my baggage. So that makes sense why you'd keep it a secret, but they don't do anything about it, and it's never really seemed like they have that kind of a relationship before now. Like, they're friends, and like, okay, maybe they're in love with each other, but we also have Ben kissing Rey at the end of the movie, and Poe and Finn were being teased as at least homosexual undertones, which was cool. Obviously, they ended up not doing anything with that. I really did think it was about the relationship at the time, which was coming out of left field. Turns out it wasn't that, but still, the movie is so unclear that if you just watch the movie, you can kind of get both interpretations out of it. That being said, I also don't really like the implication that Finn is Force sensitive. Not because I don't want to see another Jedi. I'm dressed as a Jedi. I have a bunch of lightsabers on the ground behind me. I'm a huge fan of Jedi. Getting to see more Jedi would be awesome. But what makes Finn really cool to me is the fact that he is basically an ordinary guy. And he still fights against the First Order. He fights against tyranny and space fascism. This is good. We should be encouraging this. In The Force Awakens, Finn is brave enough to pick up a lightsaber and fight a guy who's Force sensitive. If Finn's not Force sensitive, that makes that act so much braver, so much cooler, so much ballsier. And going back to how Star Wars is a morality play, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody with superpowers. So if I see something wrong with the world, I, a normal person, have to take action against it. And I think it's good and useful and a lesson worth learning that ordinary people can stand up to the problems of the world, can stand up to the people who are making the world worse. Now, some of you are probably arguing like, oh, well, you know, you've got Poe, who's technically a normal guy, but we've also been told that he's basically the best pilot in the galaxy at this point in time. I don't know about you, but I don't know any ace fighter pilots. I think it's really useful and a really good lesson to learn is that ordinary people can stand up for what's right. You don't need to have superpowers to try to make the world a better place. Now, the movie that was released does kind of have that message in it about like, oh, it's the ordinary people who will, you know, save us all from tyranny when the civilian armada arrives and blows up all the Star Destroyers. And that's all well and good. I do have a couple of problems with it. My first problem with it is that right before the fleet is revealed to have arrived, Poe is having this really serious moment of crisis. It looks like all of his friends are dying. Things are going really poorly for him. Then we hear Lando on the radio. Poe flies around the corner of a Star Destroyer and, oh my God, there's all these ships here. Hooray, we're saved. But like, all of those ships didn't arrive simultaneously, so like, couldn't they have helped Poe up to the point where he was having this moment of crisis? My second problem is that at the end of The Last Jedi, the Resistance members in the base on Crate ask for help from the wider galaxy, and they don't get it. And we don't really get an explanation for why the normal people of the galaxy don't help in The Last Jedi, outside of the fact that it's the second movie of the trilogy, so it's supposed to be the dark one. I can't figure out a significant difference between the situation at the end of The Last Jedi and the situation at the end of The Rise of Skywalker from an ordinary person's perspective. It's like, oh, the First Order is about to win, but if you show up, the Freedom Fighters can win. That's the pitch. But it works for some reason in Episode 9, and it doesn't work in Episode 8. And I don't understand the difference. If it had been established earlier in the movie that like, oh, the First Order was really on the rocks, and this was the tipping point in getting, you know, oh, we can finally defeat them, that would be one thing, but we're not seeing that. It's not parsed that way. It's like, uh-oh, things are about to get really, really, really bad, so come help us. Which was the same pitch as Episode 8. Either way, Finn doesn't have anything to do with getting the ordinary people of the galaxy to show up. So like, what is Finn doing here? He blows up the one Star Destroyer, which seems surprisingly easy, considering it's a Star Destroyer that he hijacks from the outside, but he doesn't affect the normal people of the galaxy, which is kind of his whole shtick. We get Lando doing it off screen. Lando and Chewie doing it off screen. Anyway, those are the four central pillars of this movie. Kylo Ren is pretty strong, the Emperor is about 50-50, I really don't like Rey, and Finn is the missing pillar. And so that makes this movie fundamentally weakened. It's already not doing what it's supposed to be doing. But there are a couple of other things that are more nitpicky that I also want to talk about. To start with, the planet Exegol is generally pretty cool. I like the design, I like the Sith temple, I like the interior of the Sith temple, the lightning and stuff. That's all pretty cool to look at. It also has the vibe of an adventure story of like, oh, this is a place you can't get to unless you've been there before. Very piratey in that sense. But the very nature of its piratiness then raises a ton of questions. We see that there are thousands upon thousands of people living on this planet, which I wonder how. And they've been there the whole time, basically worshiping the Sith as gods. And they've been building an enormous number of Star Destroyers. More Star Destroyers than the First Order already has. And it's implied more Star Destroyers than the Empire ever had. And each one of them has its own little Death Star style planet destroying gun attached to it. How? How did they do that? How did they build them all? How long have they been building them for? The movie does not give us answers, and they seem like really big questions that we should be getting answers to, not questions that should be getting asked at the 11th hour. Speaking of those Star Destroyers, this is one of the few times that I think corners were cut with this movie outside of the writing. These Star Destroyers, it turns out, are actually just the same model of Star Destroyer that they used for the digital assets for Rogue One, just sized up, and they put a big gun in the hangar instead of the hangar. Now, the digital assets still look fantastic, but why did they have to reuse an asset? Why couldn't they give us a new Star Destroyer design? Also, and this is a really nerdy complaint, but I do want to talk about it for a second. These Star Destroyers, since they're based off of the Rogue One models, are a class of starship in the universe called ISD-1s, Imperial Star Destroyer 1, which were used up through the Battle of Yavin and the destruction of the first Death Star. Starting in The Empire Strikes Back, we see ISD-2s, Imperial Star Destroyer 2s, which have some very slight, subtle differences that most nerdy people aren't going to recognize. But since they reuse the assets from Rogue One, which takes place before the destruction of the first Death Star, these are all really, really big ISD-1s, which again raises the question, how long have they been building these things? Are they supposed to be based off of ISD-1s? Have they been building them since the ISD-1 design and they just never updated it? Or do they just happen to look like ISD-1s because we want something recognizable for our final showdown, which has no reason to be recognizable outside of nostalgia, I guess? Similarly, since each one has a Death Star style laser, we know that the Death Star's lasers are powered by Kyber crystals, and the Kyber crystals for the Death Star were harvested in such large quantities that a planet was basically strip mined into almost non-existence. So where did the Sith acolytes on the planet you can't get to unless you've been there before get all the Kyber crystals? For that matter, where did they get all the steel to build all of these massive Star Destroyers? And they built them under ice so that when they pop out of the ground, they pop through ice? Where is the ice coming from? The temple's not under the ice, and the temple seems way older than the Star Destroyer building facilities. I have so many questions, and it's really frustrating. Keeping with my minor nitpicky complaints about the design of First Order starships, they introduce a new TIE fighter in this movie called a TIE Dagger, which I'm excited that it's a new design and not just a rehash of something from the original trilogy, but I have two problems with it. One is that its wings are triangular, as seen from the side, so like how does it land? TIE fighters can land on the ground. We see that with the flat bottoms of their wings. But this TIE fighter has a point at the bottom, so it can't land on its wings. So how is it supposed to land? Problem number two is that even though its wings are diagonal, as seen from the side, from the front, it still looks like a regular TIE fighter with two vertical wings. And so when they're flying around, you can't distinguish them from regular First Order TIE fighters, which also look like this, as seen from the front. So you've got, the two wings and the ball in the middle. Both are true for the TIE Dagger or the regular First Order TIE fighter. The TIE Dagger's got long triangular points, but you can't tell that from the profile. And this goes back to something George Lucas said, where you have to have really identifiable profiles of ships so you can tell them apart when they're flying around really quickly and you don't have to worry about it, which is why the X-Wing and the Y-Wing look so different from the regular Imperial TIE fighter and Darth Vader's TIE fighter starting in A New Hope. And that continued through all of George Lucas's run at the helm of Star Wars. Keeping with the dark side stuff, the Emperor names his fleet of super planet-killing Star Destroyers the Final Order, which I think is kind of dumb. I know it's supposed to be like evoking a final solution and that like, oh, with this, he now has complete control of the galaxy and it's all over for the good guys if he gets the ships out of atmosphere. But it also, directly references the First Order, which is the team we've been following around, which is also kind of a weird name for an organization. Like, okay, they're the best of the best. If something is of the First Order, it's the best and most important. Okay, that makes sense for Imperial self-aggrandizing, fine. But the Final Order then comments on the firstness of the first one, and a Final Order isn't something, and I think maybe it's also referencing Order 66, like, oh, we're gonna kill all the good guys, kind of a thing. It's dumb, man. I don't get it. Next up, we have the spy plotline, which doesn't make sense to me. I think the reason why the spy plotline exists in the movie as it currently exists is One, the good guys need to know that Emperor Palpatine's message is real and that Palpatine is back. And two, Abrams and Terrio write themselves into a corner after Chewbacca's death, where everybody gets captured and they have to figure out a way off the Star Destroyer. We'll talk about Chewbacca's death in a little bit, but if they didn't have to worry about any of that stuff when they go on to the Star Destroyer and they get captured, then they don't need the spy. They also don't really need the spy, I feel, for the message from the Emperor, because why would that be faked? Also, the message from the Emperor was revealed in a Fortnite event that came out before the movie was released, and it doesn't happen on screen at all. We find out only about it through the opening crawl, and just like, oh, the dead speak, Palpatine sent out a message, which I guess is really all you need. But why is Palpatine sending out a message? Because he wants to attract Kylo Ren's attention? He doesn't have friends in the First Order. We know Allegiant General Pryde is his friend in the First Order. It's like, what? What is happening? Anyway, back to the spy. I like General Hux saying that he doesn't want the Resistance to win, he just wants Kylo Ren to lose, which I think is a perfectly valid thing for him to say. We know that they have conflict and they don't really trust each other, but I never get a sense at any point in General Hux's scenes that he has a plan for once he gets rid of Kylo Ren. Like, okay, he wants to get rid of Kylo Ren, that's clear, that's fine. But he should also have a plan to deal with the Resistance once he, General Hux, is in charge. If we think about other franchises that have a lot of scheming involved, like Game of Thrones or something, you would expect there to be a multi-step plan. It's not just, oh, I'm gonna axe the guy I don't like and then hope for the best. Palpatine famously plays both sides against each other during the Clone Wars, and that man has so many plans. His contingency plans have contingency plans for their contingency plans. The guy is scheming constantly. Hux doesn't seem to be that organized or that ambitious. He's just trying to spite Kylo Ren and doesn't have a plan for anything else. And so when he gets killed unceremoniously by General Pryde, no one's really surprised. I mean, it was kind of surprising that like they did nothing with the spy storyline after that. It's like, oh, I figured out who the spy is. Blam. Okay. Speaking of the spy plotline, after Finn and Poe get the information from their contact who's in league with the First Order spy, there's this scene where they skip through hyperspace, going from planet to planet. The sequence looks pretty cool and the locations they go to seem pretty interesting, but I don't understand how this hyperspace tracking thing is supposed to work, because being able to track someone through hyperspace was a really big deal in The Last Jedi, and it was like this big device inside of a giant starship, but now regular TIE fighters are capable of following the Millennium Falcon anywhere? It's just a thing that happens that looks cool, just to make it look cool, because we haven't had a cool looking thing in 0.8 seconds, which is kind of how the first half of this movie works. We now come to the bulk of the actual plot of this movie, which is the stuff going on with the Dagger and the Sith Wayfinders. The Sith Wayfinders are devices that allow you to get to the planet of Exegol, and we're told that only 2 exist. Kylo Ren finds one in a forest, which is apparently at the base of Darth Vader's castle on Mustafar. Cool sequence. That's not particularly hidden in any elaborate way, it's just in this plinth in the middle of a forest. Okay, that seems like as valid of a place to put it as anything. Okay, fine. How does he know it's there? How is he able to find it so easily? He uses it to find Exegol. Okay, that's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. I only mention those questions I have because it becomes such a big part of the good guys plotline. The good guys don't seem to know about the Darth Vader Wayfinder, so they are instead looking for the Emperor's Wayfinder, which they don't know where it is, but they know that there was a guy that Luke and Lando were trying to track down who probably had one. They go to the planet where Luke last knew the guy who might have the Wayfinder last was. It was like 20 years ago. It's a good thing nothing has changed since then. It's also a good thing that they happen to run into Lando, who's still living on that planet for reasons. They head out into the desert to find the evil Sith assassin's spaceship. In the process, they end up in some quicksand, which is actually coincidentally a good thing because they fall into the lair of a giant snake, which is where the Sith assassin guy died. And on his person, he had a way to find the map. He didn't have the map itself, but he did have a way to find the map, which is really important. It turns out this artifact is a knife with Sith runes covering it that tell you exactly where to go. Except unless you're a sentient being who can read Sith runes and then say them out loud, you have no way of knowing where the Sith dagger is pointing you to go. Coincidentally, C-3PO is with our good guys, and he can speak all sorts of languages. But oops, he can't actually say the translation out loud because it's not part of his code. It's like illegal or something. Coincidentally, Poe knows a droidsmith who can unlock C-3PO's memory. They go to that planet, the droidsmith unlocks C-3PO's memory, he can now recite where the dagger leads them to, and it leads them to, coincidentally, the ruins of the second Death Star. Which seems like a really obvious place to look. We know that Luke was checking Force-sensitive places. Why didn't he go look where the Emperor was hanging out right before the Emperor died? Furthermore, we find out once our good guys arrive on the planet that they coincidentally are standing in just the right spot for the knife to line up with the ruins that they need the ruins to line up with, like the notches of the knife match up to ruins of the second Death Star. And there's this little thing that comes out and points to right where the Wayfinder is gonna be. Coincidentally, it's the Emperor's throne room. The Emperor's throne room, where he was literally hanging out 25 years earlier, 30-ish years earlier. How did nobody check there? It was his office. Like, why? It's the second place you should have looked. The first place would have been his office on Coruscant. The second place should be, oh right, where he was spending his last few days. It's so obvious. And then I also think it's worth repeating that the Millennium Falcon crash lands on the planet with the ruins of the second Death Star. They happen to be standing in the right spot for the edges of the knife to line up with everything. The Death Star is in ruins. It's getting like beaten up by waves. How is everything still lining up correctly? If they're 200 feet left or right of where they're standing, things aren't gonna be lining up. How does this happen? How is this even conceivably possible? It's not like it's, oh, go to this mountain range, which is gonna be, more or less permanent over hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Like, mountain ranges don't move all that much. It's trying to do this like adventure movie trope, like something from Indiana Jones. Actually, I think the Indiana Jones comparison is really apt because this is basically the go to the map room from Raiders of the Lost Ark with your staff that's 6 qadam high, and when the light is at the right angle, it's gonna come through and show you where the Ark of the Covenant is being held. But they don't have to worry about time of day. They don't have to worry about specific location to be standing. They have to go look at the Death Star and the knife will point the way, and it just happens to work. But also all that stuff is temporary. In, Raiders of the Lost Ark, yes, the city gets buried by sand, but all of the landmarks remain because the buildings don't move. They're still looking for the right pieces. In The Rise of Skywalker, none of that is true. So I don't know how anybody thought this was a good idea to have this kind of adventure set up. Or at least, like, you could have a knife point to the Wayfinder, but like, you don't need to stand there and do a protractor thing with an arm that points you to exactly where it should be. If the knife said, go to where the second Death Star was and check the Emperor's office, most of those story beats remain the same. We just don't have the, like, insulting your intelligence of, oh, you have to stand on this cliff and look, and oh, look, it happens to be in the Emperor's office. Oops, we didn't check there. Now, I've run through all of that pretty quickly. It's the bulk of the runtime of the movie, and it goes really, really quickly. Like, a lot of this stuff I only know because I've watched the movie a couple of times just to make sure I have all the notes that I need to make this review. It's fast, and it's dumb. Speaking of things that happen too quickly and too stupidly, we have Chewbacca's death. I told you we'd get to it. When they're looking at the Sith assassin's spaceship, Rey goes off because she knows that Kylo Ren is coming. Chewbacca goes off, I don't even remember why. Finn goes off looking to find Chewbacca because he's not back yet. Uh-oh, Chewbacca's been captured. Later, a transport ship is flying. Rey tries to hold it back. Kylo Ren is also trying to do something with it to the Force, prevent Rey from pulling it down, I guess, is what he's trying to do. The ship ends up not moving at all, so I don't know what they're doing. Anyway, lightning comes out of Rey's fingers because she's full of emotion, and it blows up the transport, and we are led to believe that Chewbacca is dead. This makes absolutely no sense because in the earlier scene, when Chewbacca gets captured, we see already that there are 2 transports there, and we only see one transport fly away. And we only know that Rey knows about the transport because Finn shows up and says, Rey, look at the transport, Chewie's on it. In the movie theater, I went, how do we know he's on that one? Because again, there are 2 transports in the scene where it happens. This brings us back to Finn having nothing to do. Not only does he have nothing to do besides shout Rey, like, Rey, look, Chewbacca's being captured. He gets the information wrong, so he's also an idiot. Ignoring the second transport problem, Chewbacca's death is also immediately undercut because a mere few minutes later, it is revealed that Chewbacca was not dead. He was in fact just captured because there was a second transport there, and he's fine. And the emotional problems that Rey is dealing with because of this are in fact all forced and artificially manufactured. Luckily they can go rescue Chewbacca later, but the fact that we know Chewbacca is fine removes any stakes from the situation and means that, you know, Rey doesn't actually have any character development for this part of the movie, because she didn't actually do anything evil outside of kill all the stormtroopers who were on the transport. But since all the stormtroopers are evil, except for the ones who have already defected, it doesn't really matter. This brings us to another thing that seems cool at first, but then raises a lot of questions, and that is, of course, Rey flipping over Kylo Ren's TIE silencer. It's a really cool moment. It's the bit from one of the first trailers they released. It's really cool, the moment where she flips over the TIE fighter. That's awesome. I don't have any problem with that part of it. I have a problem with, how does Kylo Ren survive? Like, we see the rest of the ship crash and the ball in the middle bounce and spins like crazy. Kylo Ren gets out of it looking absolutely unfazed. And like, I know Kylo Ren has the Force and can therefore like withstand a lot. Humans aren't supposed to be able to pod race, but because Anakin Skywalker has the Force, he's fine. But the forces we're talking about here, small f forces, we're talking about here with the spinning ship and then the crashing and the sudden stopping would be tantamount to Anakin flying headfirst into a wall, which he does not do because he survives through the first 6 movies. So it's another cool seeming moment that gets ruined by questions of logic. Again, if this was like the only thing wrong with the movie, we wouldn't be talking about this. I'd be like, hey, that's kind of weird. Anyway, the movie was great. It's not the worst thing that's happening in this movie, but it is a thing that, I don't know, I feel worth talking about now that I'm dumping a bunch of my issues onto you. We have also not yet talked about the Knights of Ren, who are Kylo Ren's henchmen, sidekicks, teammates, who we get to see in daylight for the first time in this movie. We saw them a little bit in The Force Awakens, but they were like in the background and blurry and in rain, so we don't really know what they looked like. But we get good looks at them here in Episode 9. Again, the designs, pretty cool. There's apparently a bunch of lore behind each one and like their personalities and stuff. I have not internalized any of that information, but I know it exists. The problem is that they do nothing in this movie. Like, they make an appearance and like, ooh, they're kind of supposed to be intimidating, walking around and being mean and stuff. But they're just vaguely menacing in a couple of scenes, and then they die. I think one of the really smart things that Rian Johnson did with Episode 8 is he made Snoke's bodyguards the Praetorian Guards. He made them the guys wearing red, not the Knights of Ren. Because he said that Kylo Ren being emotionally attached to these Knights of Ren would make the situation like emotionally fraught. It changes the emotional dynamic if he has to fight people that he presumably likes and at least knows. And Rian Johnson knew that the point of the Praetorian Guards was basically just to be an obstacle for Rey and Ren to kill. The Praetorian Guards don't do anything else besides die. Rian Johnson knew that the Knights of Ren had been set up to be kind of significant, so I don't want to just introduce them and then immediately kill them off. The problem is that's what J.J. Abrams did in the very next movie. I think what the Knights of Ren are supposed to be doing here is acting kind of like the supreme leader of the First Order's Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. But in the Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul are traveling across Middle-earth because Sauron can't, or won't, or just doesn't feel like it. He doesn't want to go hunting after the ring. He sends the Nazgul to do it. The Knights of Ren are kind of doing something similar, but every time there's supposed to be a showdown with Rey, Kylo Ren shows up to do it anyway. So it would be like if Sauron showed up at Weathertop to find the ring, or if Sauron was walking around the Dead Marshes instead of the Nazgul flying overhead. We don't need there to be Nazgul because Kylo Ren is doing their job for them. And also we do see a couple of times that the Knights of Ren get like close to Rey and they do nothing about it. After they leave Pisana, the desert planet, and they go to Kijimi, where Babu Frick, the droidsmith, is, the Knights of Ren are like 8 feet behind Rey's ship. They are so close they could just blow it up, because at this point their orders are to kill Rey. So why don't they do that? They just follow it, or they just follow them around? Again, I think it's supposed to be reminding us of when Boba Fett is following Han, but Darth Vader specifically says he wants them alive. We haven't gotten those instructions between Ren and the Knights of Ren, so like, why are they just following them around? And then when they get to Kijimi, we don't see the Knights of Ren again. They're literally not there, so like, they just report back to Kylo Ren that they've gone to Kijimi, and then they don't do anything about it. Why? Why don't they do anything about it? The next time we see the Knights of Ren is on Exegol, where Kylo Ren proceeds to kill all of them and seems to have absolutely no emotional baggage about it whatsoever. So, why? Why? What are they doing? What are they up to? Besides being an obstacle for Ren to kill. Like, what's going on? After C-3PO gets his memory reset and he translates what's on the knife, they find out that they have to go to the Endor system for the ruins of the second Death Star. And this is really nitpicky, but Finn says, "Where the last war ended," referring to the Endor system. And this is a problem for, it grinds my gears. It's a tiny thing, but it really grinds my gears, because Finn should know that the Galactic Civil War between the Empire and the Rebellion didn't end at Endor. That was not the end of the war. The end of the war happened on Jakku, where Rey has been living. And not only should Finn know that, but J.J. Abrams should know that, because he invented the planet of Jakku. That's his idea. I grant that like this may be really nitpicky and like that line is to help remind people that Endor was where Episode 6 ended, but the lore around the last war ending on Jakku is pretty robust, and was pretty robust when the movie came out. The campaign for Battlefront 2, which was a very popular video game at the time, established very clearly that the Battle of Jakku was the ending point. There were a series of books about how the Battle of Jakku was the end of the war. That's why all the ruins are on Jakku, like all the Star Destroyers and stuff, because that's where the war ended. How does nobody know this? How did this get through quality control? Like, that's not where the war ended. And like, oh, you could certain point of view it, or like, oh, the death of the Emperor was basically the start of the end of the war, but it's not the end of the war. Again, it's one line. I know it's fairly pedantic, but I don't think it's as pedantic as it normally would be if I was criticizing one line of dialogue. I've been talking a lot about villains and what the villains are up to, but I also do want to talk about what the good guys are up to, specifically the character of Rose. There's already a lot going on in this movie, and Rose doesn't get to do a lot, especially considering she was a pretty major character in the preceding film. With the passage of time, that feels less significant, but at the time, it felt like a real slap in the face to Kelly Marie Tran, the actress, who got a lot of hate after The Last Jedi, basically just for being an Asian woman in Star Wars. So when, in the next movie, her character basically gets sidelined and made a much smaller role, it felt like a direct insult to her. Rewatching it recently, it feels less like an insult and more just they don't have a job for her to be doing in the main team, so they left her at home and didn't bring her out to play. I wanted to mention it because it did feel like an insult at the time, and it might have been a reaction to how she was being treated by the fans, but I don't think it was malicious. But still, Rose doesn't have a lot to do, which is a bigger problem with everybody who gets left behind who talks to Leia. Not a lot of them have a lot to do. So, just maybe this movie is overstuffed and rushed. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say here. But I think Rose is particularly emblematic of that. Staying with the good guys, we also have to talk about Luke Skywalker. The scene between Rey and Luke on Ahch-To is actually okay. A lot of the dialogue that Abrams and Terrio give to Luke does feel like it's supposed to be explaining or retconning the events of The Last Jedi for people who didn't understand it. Since I don't feel like I needed the explanation, I felt like a lot of the dialogue was a little bit superfluous, but it was being very clear for everybody to be on the same page. So generally, I'm okay with that scene. One of the big problems I have, though, is when Luke raises his X-Wing out of the water. In The Last Jedi, we see that the X-Wing has been underwater, presumably the entire time Luke's been on the island. The implication when we see it is that it is damaged beyond repair. This is re-emphasized when, instead of flying across the galaxy to confront Kylo Ren and save the Resistance, Luke instead projects a vision of himself across all that distance, straining himself to the point where he dies exhausted. That makes perfect sense given all the limitations that Rian Johnson set up for Luke and the headspace that Luke is in at that point. So, I'm fine with all of that. Also, there is a reference book that specifically mentions that part of the wing of Luke's X-Wing is in fact the door to Luke's hut, further emphasizing the fact that the X-Wing is not a viable mode of transportation. But in the very next movie, Abrams and Terrio have Luke pull the X-Wing out of the water so that Rey can fly it into the unknown regions through a really dangerous thing to a planet she's never been to before, but she has the map. This completely cheapens and undermines Luke's decision at the end of The Last Jedi. If he could have flown the X-Wing, why did he not fly the X-Wing? Before it was he didn't have a choice. He didn't have any other way to get off the planet. So he had to project himself. But now he's projecting himself because the vibes? I don't know what, like, Episode 9 has made Episode 8 worse. And the stuff that was in Episode 8 was really cool. And so trying to make that worse makes Episode 9 look really bad. Also, I know it's supposed to be an echo of the moment where Luke couldn't pull the X-Wing out of the water, which again undermines Episode 8 because we know that Luke absolutely could have pulled the X-Wing out of the water. Luke could have pulled the X-Wing out of the water in Episode 5. He was just in his head about it. Is he still in his head about it in Episode 8? And now that he's dead, he's not in his head about it anymore? That is stupid. By the way, I know it's supposed to be a reference to Luke pulling the X-Wing out of the water on Dagobah because they play Yoda's theme while he's doing it, which is the song that plays when Yoda pulls the X-Wing out of the water in Episode 5. The last thing I think I want to talk about today is the concept that gets introduced in this movie of the Force Dyad. We're told that Kylo Ren and Rey are connected as a Force Dyad in some way. This is unexplained in the movie, and in the intervening years, various comic writers and book writers have tried to kind of talk about it and introduce it, and it's still not very well explained. So it continues to be kind of this mystery about, these two are fighting and teaming up together because they're somehow connected. How are they connected? Why are they connected? How often does this kind of connection happen? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. We know next to nothing about what a Force Dyad is or how it works or anything about it. We just know that I guess it was essential so that Palpatine can use their jointness to make himself even more powerful than he used to be. Feels kind of unnecessary because he was already the most powerful Force user that we know since he was able to defeat Yoda in one-to-one combat. So, all right, we did it. I think that's everything I want to say about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. As you may have gathered, I'm not a huge fan, which means that I think I have to give this movie 2 stars out of 5. 1 star is absolutely a Star Wars bump. I love Star Wars movies. This movie is very Star Wars. There are a lot of Star Wars that happen in it. I am biased. I am a human being. It's my review. I can do what I want. And the other star does come from how good the movie looks and how we need to recognize the fact that the team who put blood, sweat, and tears into this movie did a really good job with all of their assigned tasks. It is only 2 stars though, because the central themes, the core ideology of the writing is fraught with problems. I have been dunking on this movie for quite a long time now, but I have also read the script for the Duel of the Fates, the version that Colin Trevorrow was going to make for Episode 9 before he was fired and replaced by J.J. Abrams at the last minute. And as much as it pains me to say it, I do think the movie we got is better than the movie we would have gotten if Colin Trevorrow had made the script that he wrote. The cardinal sin of that movie is that Kylo Ren does not get redeemed, which, as I talked about, is an essential part of a Star Wars movie, and so that is huge red flags. I have big problems with that, and so, in a way, I'm kind of glad we got the movie that we got. But since Episode 9, as it exists, was so disappointing, I have spent the last 6 years thinking about how I would have done things, how I think the movie should have gone, especially given the 4 core pillars of any Episode 9. How would I have done it differently? And that is going to be the topic of our next video, which is my headcanon / pitch for Andrew Edder's Episode 9. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, favorite, share, and subscribe so that you know when my part 2 comes out. It's been a very long time since I've done a video on this channel, so I don't know if I'll be doing any more of them. So subscribing may only have limited utility, but it's a YouTube video, you gotta say this stuff. And if you've never been here before, I do have a bunch of old movie reviews and some other unrelated videos that you can go check out. And I think that's it for today. I will see you all next time. May the Force be with you. Bye.